Tom Henrickson is a problem-solving technology professional. He has worked in various roles in technology for over 20 years. Tom has learned how to solve challenging issues in technology and lead technical teams. He can help you develop those skills too. And now, we'll hand it over to Tom Henrickson.
EA groups for many years now, and I always like to start off by saying, first off, I'm Tom and I'm a developer and I'm sorry. So as you can imagine, we have a lot to talk about, as Randy mentioned. So just to kind of give you guys a little overview, we have a few questions here. I'd like to get to know you guys a little better. Then I've got essentially a 30-minute keynote, but we're going to kind of book in that a little, kind of cut it in half, really, if you will, kind of like a sandwich, and we'll cut it in half. We'll do a little icebreaker. We'll do the first half of that. Then we have some questions, as Randy mentioned. So feel free to share those in the chat as we're going along, or during the question session, you can feel free to come off mute and turn on, if you want to turn on your video, feel free, and share your questions. So we'll go into that. So we'll kind of do a little icebreaker here. We'll do the first half, some questions. Then we'll do the second half. We're going to wrap up with a little more questions, and then close it up and hand it back over to Randy. So to get started, feel free to, you can come off mute and share this, or feel free to share it in the chat. I have a few questions that I want you guys to share with me, have a little discussion first. So as I mentioned, I'm a developer, and I want you guys to think about, as BAs, what kind of, or maybe you want a superpower for another reason, but if you could have one superpower, what would it be? Feel free, like I said, you can come off mute, share that. If you want to share it in the chat, either way is fine. I'm good with either, and I think Randy is as well.
How about read minds?
Read minds. That would be good. That would be good. Now, I just want to give you a little clue here, Monica. We're gonna talk a little bit about communication. I think that's kind of one of the things that mind reading would help, wouldn't it? If we could just read people's mind, we wouldn't have to talk as much, right?
Yep.
Just download it, kind of like the Matrix, right?
Right.
Anybody else have a superpower they wish they had?
Oh, these are good ones in the chat.
Better, yeah. See the future, better communication skills. Persuade, yes. Yes, that's going to come up real soon. Invisibility, yes. Nice, very good. Very good. Excellent. So we've talked a little bit about some superpowers. We've had some people share. Clairvoyance, that's a good one, Clay. Very good. Now, I want to tell you, Randy had sent me an email a while back, and I think this is a good question she brought up. And I think this is one of the things, like I mentioned, I'm a developer. So as BAs, where have you guys struggled with developers? And maybe it speaks to Monica's, what she said, or maybe it's some of those superpowers, but share maybe where you've struggled with developers.
Hi, Tom, this is AJ.
Hey, AJ.
I'm coming off mute because this is near and dear to my heart. I work directly with development leads that have been with the company for almost 20 years each. Mm-hmm. So they were with the company when there were about 20 people. Now we're about 1,000. So they know the business better than the business knows the business. So that at times is a challenge, mm-hmm. because they know the program, they know the way the people think, and we have next to no documentation. So it's frustrating for me as a BA trying to be that liaison between the business and IT, to say, yes, it really is a bug or a problem, a defect or whatever. It takes a lot of research and convincing, mm-hmm. to bring it to the development leads.
Yeah. You almost feel like, AJ, it sounds like you have to be an attorney and prove your case to those developers, don't you?
Absolutely.
They're putting you on trial. And you're like, I'm doing my job here. Oh, that's good. That's good. I like, I was kind of giggling as I was reading in the chat. Deborah put, developers don't read the requirements or they ignore them.
I can relate to that too.
Oh, yes. Well, and I have to take I think as they call it, a failure bow. I was telling Randy earlier. So she sent me an email I think about 10 days ago or a couple weeks ago. And in it, I scanned it. And then I realized I was looking to get prepared for this, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, that she had a couple questions in there. So I felt bad. So I have to take a failure bow there and say, I sometimes don't read. I think we sometimes scan and think, oh yeah, I got that. But sometimes we have to read and maybe reread it. Maybe I can shed some light on why developers don't read requirements. Well, I think probably to AJ talked about, I think sometimes the developers think they know it better than the business, which, that's probably a whole nother discussion, but that's probably why I think sometimes developers think, oh, I know this stuff. But, needless to say, we probably need to have a little more collaboration and communication. Some developers just want to be left alone in code. Yes. And do not like getting questions from the BAs. That's very true, Monica. We're just to kind of clue you in the presentation, you're going to hear a few people that I've worked with that were like that. I seriously, this is something I was a manager of a team a couple years ago, and we had a developer basically say, he basically came to me and said, Tom, I don't want to come to meetings. Can you just email me all the requirements and I will work on them? And I had to say it with a straight face, but it's like, we need to have a communication. We need to have a conversation to, kind of have a talk. And because even though developers sometimes think they know everything, let's be honest, we're all human and we make mistakes, right? So we need to have those conversations. Yes, Agile is helping developers get more engaged with the requirements. Totally agree with that, Deborah. That's one thing I was able to become this is not to recommend it, but I was a developer, a manager, and a scrum master of a team. And I learned about Agile and all the things it does. And I think I totally agree with you. I think it's just getting people to talk is probably one of the best things to have a conversation. Awesome. Times has been challenging to communicate how important design. Yes, the scope of the requirements. Totally agree, Randy. Totally agree. It's that design and some of those upfront conversations are still important. So true. So I have one more question here, but I want to challenge you guys to answer this with one-word answers. So if you pay double, you can get two. Just kidding. But what makes a successful business analyst? If you can do it in one word, that's bonus points. But if you want to take 2 or 3 words, go ahead. Communication, Clay. Very good. Very good. You're going to hear more about that soon. Yes, knowledge, critical thinking, understanding, communication, inquisitive. I like that, AJ. Analytical thinking, finesse. Very good. Very good, Randy. That helps. That helps. Awesome. Listening. Negotiation skills. Yes. Experience. Awesome. Very good, Deborah. All right. Well, it's great. It's been, I had a couple questions there, kind of get to know you guys, experience. That's another good one. So what I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to go into the first half. We have a few questions. Feel free, like Randy mentioned before, if you have questions during the presentation, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so. Feel free to share those in the chat. Then we're going to give you guys a chance to kind of converse. We got a couple questions to kind of talk about this conversations. As I mentioned, just to kind of clue you in too, this presentation is from my viewpoint as a developer. But what we want to do using the questions, we're going to take questions kind of like we just did with those questions for the icebreaker. We want to look at it from your experience as a BA and kind of compare, because I think that's where I think the critical thing that we need to understand is we need to understand everyone's perspective. And that's kind of why I think this is a good conversation starter here tonight. So like I said, I'm going to talk for a little bit. We're going to have some questions, get you guys involved so you just don't have to listen to me the whole time. So, but other than that, we'll jump in with it. I don't know if you want to, if you're recording, Randy, if you want to make pin me so you get me or however you want to do that, just kind of, I know I've had people record and it'll show somebody else. So just to kind of let you know.
Oh, thank you. I just did that. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. This is Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy, Part 1. Here's a string of thoughts that ran across my mind early in my programming career. Why can't people just leave me alone and I can do my work? I can figure this out myself. I don't need others' help or any input to turn this thing around. Why don't people understand me? I think it must be because they're just dumb. They don't recognize genius when they see it. Perhaps you've been there too, a frustrated developer who feels like they know enough. However, the success you thought you'd have is out of reach. You see others who make better strides, but why? Is it a skills gap? I want to share with you how I learned about my skills gap. Java, check. Linux, check. SQL, check. Humans, what? Humans are hard. Code is easy. So I focused on the technology. One of my first mentors was a database administrator named Doyle. Now, he really knew his stuff, but didn't say much. That can make learning challenging. Doyle would say a little, but it was quite important. One thing he would do is fix the problem for me. Doyle would fix it so quickly and then leave. What did you do? He was already gone. Working with Doyle gave me some insight. Technical people hate explaining basic stuff. Ask them a simple question and they will flip the bozo bit on you. What is the bozo bit, you say? A few years after working with Doyle, I got to work with a software architect named Corey. He had many interesting observations. If you asked Corey one stupid question, he wouldn't answer your question or work with you. That is the bozo bit. Bozo, of course, refers to Bozo the clown, the bit in reference to computer bit or binary storage. Now, Corey was pretty extreme, but many developers can be that way. To gain respect from those developers, we need to know the technology. Humans are hard, code is easy. So I focused on the coding. I learned new technologies. I tried to keep my head down and avoid getting the bozo bit flipped on me. A few years later, I transitioned into a new role, technical lead. One year during my annual evaluation, my leader shared with me, Tom, we think you have solid credentials. Coding skills got you the job, but we need you to develop other skills. My leader shared with me where I was failing, delegation. He shared how I wasn't delegating work to my teammates. Case in point, there was an upgrade that needed to be done. I did the work in 10 minutes or so. To explain that to a few teammates would have taken twice that amount of time or more. Another trap I fell into with delegation is the belief in our value. We can convince ourselves that we are worth more when others can't do the same work as us. I remember working with Jamie the first time. I wasn't quite sure he understood what we were doing. He was always done quickly. And then I finally asked him. Here he had created a script to deploy changes and update dependencies. Oh man, I was doing this all manually. I was worried about delegation, and the people I worked with had better ideas. Perhaps I didn't know everything I thought I did. A few years later, I got to work with a leader named John. We knew each other through a mutual friend. I had begun to coach individuals and teams. John wanted an outside resource to help him change his team's mindset. He shared how most IT people work with others in a transactional fashion. We get the requirements and we solve the issue. John said, Tom, my team is like bank tellers. They get asked to fix something and they do, just like a teller gets a check and deposits the check. I want my team to be more like a financial planner. A financial planner builds a relationship. Then they can anticipate needs. So you're saying, John, you want your team to have better relationships with their customers? John said, Tom, if they develop relationships, they will develop empathy and understanding. Relationships, understanding and empathy? Huh? That won't work. That's what I thought at the time, but I was wrong. John knew his team wasn't as understanding and as empathetic as he'd hoped they'd be. He began requiring them to talk to the community directors when they traveled. These conversations helped them understand and empathize with their customers. Instead of just fixing the problem, they fostered relationships too. Each little change John made helped his team understand the community directors had many things on their plate. These conversations also worked the other way too. The community directors began to give John's team space. If something went wrong, they trusted them to resolve it. John proved me wrong. He overcame his deficit by being curious and empathetic. He was able to change the way his team interacted with the organization, so much so that he has since been given additional responsibilities. From bank tellers to financial planners, he remade the image of his IT team. This brings me to my main idea. Coding skills got you the job, influence will get you the career. Coding skills got you the job, influence will get you the career. What do I mean? Developers are focusing on technology skills only. If we truly want to set ourselves apart, we need to know how to influence and collaborate with teams. Gone are the days when we could just send in requirements with pizza and out pops code. Organizations are looking for more from their developers. My problem, was I was terrible at relationships. I had confirmation. I had proof. Although I didn't start out as a developer though. My first stop in my professional career was quite different. My first job out of college, it seems like yesterday, I started at Wallace. What is Wallace, you say? We sold business forms and office supplies in Des Moines, Iowa, kind of like Dunder Mifflin. Armed with a business management degree and no real idea, I had 3 job options when I graduated from college. I could sell insurance, or I could sell life insurance, or I could sell business forms. So I did what any sane person would do. I sold business forms. Who wants to call on a friend's parents for insurance anyways? Did I mention that Des Moines, Iowa was the insurance capital of the world? Back to my first day at Wallace. Can you believe I had to make a few cold calls before lunch? Let me remind you, in college, the only time I called my friends was when we were having a kegger. Getting people to buy business forms is a bit more difficult than getting college students to drink beer. Now, I really didn't want to make those calls, but lunch was getting close. I was given 3 prospects from another sales representative to call on. Hello, is Mike Huff available? Sure. Can you let him know Tom Henrickson called? Yeah, I'm from Wallace. Click. Whew. Hello, is this Bill Hegna? Oh, sorry, Mr. Hegna. I apologize if our label's off here. Product, click. Whoa, I guess we got disconnected there. Okay, just one more and we can go to lunch. What? Do we call on gentlemen's clubs? My coworkers all die laughing. Turns out this is their way of initiating new sales representatives. My sales career went down in flames pretty quickly. Similar to Tommy Boy, my sales techniques were not appreciated. Soon after my first day in sales, I started to realize something. This wasn't going anywhere. A friend of mine from high school shared with me the opportunity in technology, so I began to pursue a different path and get a new degree. I left my job in sales and began work as a developer. Now, as you can imagine, working as a developer is quite a bit different than working in sales. The sales office I worked in was always full of people talking. They would be talking on the phones to customers or talking to each other. The developers I worked with, well, they were a quiet bunch on the whole. Friday afternoon in the sales office, the newest rep had to go get beer for everyone. Friday afternoon for the developers was quiet just like the rest of the week. Now, perhaps it's starting to sound like I didn't want to make this change, but that was not the case. I slowly began to realize I was more Spock than Jimmy Fallon. The quiet contemplative work of a developer suited me more. As my technology career started off, I began to work in a lot of old technologies, but I wanted to move into something more current. I started to hear a lot of buzz around the Java language. In my free time and nights and weekends, I would read and work through tutorials online. A few months later, all this work paid off when a company leader came to me and said, Tom, would you be able to help Dave with a new application? Turned out they needed someone who could write an application using Java. I Of course, agreed. Like Luke beginning to use the Force. I was starting with some basics. As my Java skills began to improve from experience, I learned a few other things too. I began to work with someone who seemed quite sharp from a technical perspective. But Eric wasn't easy to get along with. He would yell at people he worked with. You might say he was a complete jerk sometimes. The managers and team put up with this in a large part because he was productive. I could still see it now when I close my eyes. Now, Eric was a smoker and he was trying to quit, which made him even testier. Eric and Sri were working together on some files when I came walking down a row of cubes, and I could see Eric in Sri's cube yelling. You know how people get mad and their veins look like they're gonna pop out of their head? Eric's veins were about ready to explode, and then he ran out the door. I guess he needed a smoke. I asked Sri if he was okay, and he said, yeah, I'm okay, but no one should have to put up with him. Sri couldn't have been more correct. Eric was a tyrant who ran around like Darth Vader, intimidating everybody. We all put up with this terrible treatment just because he was able to code a lot. Even though developers act like Spock, we have feelings too. Eric was a coding hero, and coding heroes can sometimes take all the tough work and make it easier for others. But working with a coding hero can be challenging because they can take all the tough work and make it easier for others, but it can stunt the overall growth of the group. If you work with a coding hero and they take vacation, things can fall apart. Let me share an example of a leader who dealt with a similar issue. Now, Ben was a leader that I worked with, and he had a coding hero. We'll call him Dave. He would code solutions that were more complex than others could understand. Dave was coming up on a milestone birthday. To celebrate, he was going to bike across multiple states with all his gear. Now, Ben knew this was going to be an issue, so he met with the team and they discussed the challenges. The team decided to begin to have knowledge transfer sessions with Dave. Ben helped foster this collaboration, and it also allowed the team to slowly chip away at the knowledge gap. My next stop, I began to master my skills in Java. I was responsible for an application that required me to learn some new technologies. Now, software development can be a bit like trending song sales on iTunes. One day something's hot, the next day it's out of date. During this time in my career, many open source tools became popular. Mastery for Luke Skywalker came after a battle with Darth Vader. Programming is a lot like writing. As the author Stephen Pressfield says, the amateur tweets, the pro works. Professional programmers show up every day and slay small demons. Now, the first skill I needed to master as a developer was debugging. Of course, today the tools are much more mature. One of the first applications I had to debug didn't have any such tools. I was armed with print statements in a log file, quite primitive by today's standards. All right, let's see, where can I find out where that value is being set? All right, let's add a print statement, recompile, compile error, add the semicolon, recompile, run the report. Oh, the database isn't set up right. Okay, let me update that table, update it, run the report, tail the log. Now that looks better. Of course, debugging is so much easier today, but we still need to use the old bean. As Steve McConnell points out in his book, Code Complete, we need to learn the types of mistakes we make. Early in my Java career, I made the same mistake time and again. I would forget to initialize my variables. I can still hear my coworker Ken laughing at me when he would look at my code and point out my obvious error. We need to take a step back frequently and inspect on what we're doing. Think, how can I improve my coding, debugging, and testing? Software developers like to impress each other. I had to use the singleton pattern to fix that. Don't worry, most developers don't know what that means either. There are many esoteric topics we can talk about for hours. In Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, Greg McEwen shares how important editing is to journalism. Of course, the journalists bring the ideas and write up the stories. The editor does the important job. They review the piece and rework it. Over my years, I've mentored many developers. One in particular sticks out. He began reading about code basics. This made him add unnecessary code from time to time. I remember debugging an error he was getting together when I asked him, why is this loop here? When he looked at me unsure and said, I don't know. I thought it would help. Whew. He thought it would help. Once we removed his unnecessary loop, we resolved his error. Adding code is easy. Knowing what to keep is hard. Now, it's not that I'm saying computer science basics are not important. We need to master these too. However, if we put our sole focus on them, our careers will falter. I spoke before about Eric. He had mastered computer science. However, his teammates couldn't stand him now. We need to be good at our work and get along with our team. If we do just one of these, we aren't doing our job. All right, that is the first half. So I have a few questions, but I want to check the chat here. Looks like we got a few comments in here. Some developers want to tell me to tell them how to do their work, but I think I should figure that out. Am I wrong? That's a good question, Demra. Yeah. What do others people think? I think that's probably something we could discuss a little bit, don't you think, as a group? What Deborah commented there.
I agree with you, Tom. I reach out to the developers because they know the code, they know how the program works. And so I look to them for options instead of the business dictating it. And then I provide the options to the business.
Yeah, that's good. Kind of get some different viewpoints, right? Because sometimes we might think the code might do it one way, but does it the other, but it's also good, I guess, to get those different viewpoints, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes I don't want to give some of the business stakeholders I don't want them to get too excited and too happy about some solution that I haven't had the developers kind of vet and ensure that it's a good, efficient and effective kind of method to solve something. So I definitely don't take it upon myself. I lean on them a little bit and I like to hear their feedback. So yeah, I agree. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Exactly.
Well, and especially the business doesn't typically know the back end. So the efficiencies of the system, where it might break down with what the business wants to implement. So it's really key to involve the developers.
Very good. Important. Now, I would just want to kind of comment too. AJ, you have a comment in there too. You talk about branding and how important that is, because sometimes the IT department or could get a kind of that reputation of being hard to work with or always saying no. I think that's a really good point. I think, we kind of have to come together and not I guess be too prescriptive, but be more collaborative, right? Is that kind of what you're saying, AJ?
Yeah, and it's so basically I think that is a big part of why I was brought into this company. The company's 1,000 employees. It was just slightly less that when I was brought in about 3 years ago. And I'm the only BA, there's no PM. So I was fulfilling that quasi role, but realized most of my job really was building relationships. And so then I delved into, there's a whole profession about business relationship management. So I started getting into that, and it just built on my whole concept of branding and showing maturity levels in business relationship management, the value that you need to track and, work with the business and IT and show that you're both trying to work together.
Yeah.
And the value of that relationship.
Yeah, that's so important. As I mentioned in that part of the talk too, that John that I worked with, I have to give him full credit because I, as a developer, didn't think about those things. And I think it's so important as you think about those relationships in your career are so important. The people you work with, sounds like AJ, you're really building relationships in your organization, and that's so critical, isn't it? All right, so we talked a little bit about relationships. I know AJ, you kind of brought that up. I think that's important. Is there anything, I guess, anything you guys, I know obviously being part of this group, I think is probably a way to foster some professional relationships, but any other things you guys would share or think are good things to maybe to remind us of?
I don't know if we touched on this other comment that Deborah had about eliciting requirements.
Mhm.
And she says it seems a BA role in eliciting requirements is a lesser need in Agile since developers are working closely with the product owner.
Good question. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Randy.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Does anybody want to weigh in on that? It seems like I would say I've been part of a couple different organizations in that, the BA role, the PO role, it seems like that's still in flux. And, but what have you guys seen, or what are your guys' thoughts?
I guess I can weigh in a little bit. I prefer to still have I work in software development, and we do have product owners. But I also think that the business analysis role is really critical in defining the requirements, and also still kind of having that. I think the business analysts, they kind of bridge between so many different areas: design, developers, business stakeholders, even quality assurance and testers. And so I see the business analysis role kind of following the entire life cycle of software development. And I think it's still critical, even though they're product owners.
Yeah, I would agree. Anyone else have some thoughts on that? Clay, Deborah, Cindy, AJ?
I just wanted to add to that. I think that the BA also bring to the table, typically developers won't have
AJ, I think you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
just me.
Yeah, I heard that too. I wasn't sure if it was on my end, so I wasn't sure.
And then Deborah, you had a follow-up comment here in the chat also, to just kind of hone in on what your problem that you were facing is that the project manager thinks developers should write the user stories.
Yeah, because I've done a lot of work on working with a business and have domain expertise on things, and then they just want to forget the requirements document and write the stories based on the business case I developed, which I don't think she gets it. So, yeah, got a situation. We're transitioning from waterfall to agile in this new business, and yeah, it's just I'm in a struggle right now, trying to figure out my role. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think
unfortunately don't seem to be well defined for some organizations. Like I've been in places where they're better defined, and they strategize better, and they let the BA really fill in the true role that they should be filling in, versus like, oh, let's bypass this person, let's just have the developers talk to the business, because maybe it's a small enough team where they could have those kind of interactions. In bigger organizations, sometimes they tend to be more, the roles seem sometimes, at least with my personal experience, a bit better defined. And not as much stepping on somebody else's toes or bypassing people that shouldn't be bypassed in the process. But it sounds like Deborah doesn't have the perfect structure there in the organization.
Yeah, they're trying to get their structure together. They had what they thought was a BA, then I came in, then they realized what a BA really was. And then they put agile, they're moving agile into it, and so the first team just ignored everything I did and went their own way. So I thought, well, why am I here? And I even asked, it's like, maybe I should just go. So I moved to a different area so that I could do my BA work. So But yeah,
I think that clarity, I think you might have mentioned that a little bit, Monica, but that's so important to have kind of that role clarity of who's got what. So nothing's dropped and people know what their part is.
yeah, and I work in the project management office. That's where they put me when I first got hired. So I'm doing a PMO BA
Mhm.
role. So getting there.
That's one thing I think is interesting. I know as I've worked with different companies, like, as you mentioned, some places call it the BA, but like, I think some of you mentioned this, the BA is doing quality assurance, they're doing the project manager job, and they're doing the BA role. It's just interesting how every organization's a little different and how they, how the skill sets and what they ask of people. So.
And Scrum Master as well.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So now you guys heard, I had a little career change there, as you heard, from sales to developer. But just wanted to ask you guys if you had any, maybe you've been in a business analyst all your career, maybe you've made a transition or two, but just if you guys had any experience with that or any sorts of career transitions along the way.
Well, I was a developer in the very beginning, way back. I've got some years on me. And a DBA,
Mhm.
then a business analyst, then a Scrum Master business analyst, then a project manager, business analyst, Scrum Master. Now I'm a PMO BA tester. Yeah, I think we all wear multiple hats.
Yeah. I see Mark said he started as a programmer and then moved to analysis. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people go through different maneuvers through their career as they go through, right? AJ did development, but companies always wanted business analysts. Yep. Communication skills. Yeah, that's right. That's important. That's important. Excellent. All right. Very good. Well, I see we're gone through a few questions. I'm going to finish up. I'll do the second half, and then we have some more questions to kind of bring this back. So you're going to hear more about, I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about, I think are going to come up. Some of, like Monica, you brought up clarity. You're going to hear a lot about that here soon. While Cindy had an interesting, so tech support, trainer to tester, business analyst, and then moving back to training. So it sounds like Cindy's gone full circle there. Very interesting. All right, so this is the second half. Humans are hard, code is easy. So feel free, as I mentioned, as you go through the presentation, feel free to share any questions, and we'll have a few more questions for you as we come to the end. So second half. As I learned more about soft skills, my career progressed. I started out as a developer and then moved into a senior developer role. Next, I moved into a technical lead, and then finally, I moved to a manager of software development. At that point in my career, I was really feeling good about my career progression. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday morning in May. I took my kids to school and came into the office at my normal time, a little before 8 a.m. Oddly enough, my boss was in. He usually came in at 9 or after. I sat down and unpacked my things. Then Scott, my boss, came to my desk and said, "Tom, can I talk with you?" I said, "Sure," and then I followed him to his office. Although when we came to his office, he took a right instead. That's strange, as I thought as I followed Scott down the hallway. Then we took a left into Sandy's office. Who is Sandy, you ask? Well, she was the director of human resources. We sat down, and then Scott looked at me and said, "Tom, this is your last day here." If you've ever had that said to you at work or in a relationship, you know what it feels like. The rest was strange as I felt a calm come over me. I knew something was going to happen. Although as I looked across the table, I could tell Scott and Sandy felt terrible. They discussed the next steps. I packed my things and left. Getting fired gives us a good chance to reflect. What did we do wrong? How could we have avoided this? As I look back, I realized one lesson first. What led to this was a lack of clarity. I needed to ask better questions. Therefore, the team I led didn't execute accordingly. Processing this, though, took time as we can get frustrated and want to blame others. However, we need to own our mistakes. That helped me move forward. The second lesson I learned was the importance of relationship management. As John taught us earlier, we need to continually foster our connections. I began to reach out to my network, and the opportunities were plentiful. So even in something as trying and as traumatic as getting fired can be a moment for learning, if we just take the time to unpack those lessons. Mastering basic skills requires guidance. Early in my career, I worked with a developer named Wei. He instilled in me a systemic approach that I still use today. Software development is essentially problem solving. Wei saw that oftentimes I was trying to solve 5 things at once. Wei's guidance was brought clear to me a few years later when I attended a seminar. At Michael Hyatt's Best Year Ever conference, he discussed goal setting. Michael said, "Detailed plans are great if you're building a nuclear submarine." He continued, "For everything else, just focus on the next step." Wei and Michael agreed on this point. Don't overthink it. In Proverbs, it is said, "In the multitude of counselors, there is safety." Luke's journey first brought him to Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he learned some basics, similar to what I learned from Wei. He kept learning, and so have I. Reflection doesn't come easy for me. I want to move on to the next thing. In David Marquis' book, Leadership is Language, he details the red work, the doing, and the blue work, the thinking. In the book, David discusses how important they are both aspects of making progress. He uses the Industrial Revolution as an example, where the workers did the red work and the managers did the blue work. Today, us knowledge workers must do both. The simple pause can give us a chance to step back and reflect. How can I or we do this better? Think, apply, reflect. By now, you're starting to think, "Tom, I'm a developer. I don't need no stinking soft skills." Of course, if you don't want your career to get better, keep on keeping on. My career path has changed dramatically as I've learned the importance of communication, relationships, and influence. Let's explore these 3 core soft skills. These will set the stage for a career transformation. So remember, coding skills got you the job. Influence will get you the career. Number 1, communication. Listen to what is being said. Ask good questions and seek clarity. Developers who do this write better code. They don't assume they know the answer. In the book, The Pragmatic Programmer, Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas talk about the importance of digging for requirements. Look between the lines. Part of communication is knowing our message. I've opened my mouth too many times in my career, just started talking. Know what you want to say? And say it. Number 2, influence. In How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie describes how we need to talk in the other person's interest. Now, I once tried to convince a corporate vice president we should use a new technology. He wasn't interested at all. However, the next time I spoke to him, I aligned a technical change with a corporate objective. The outcome of that conversation was quite different. Number 3 of the 3 core soft skills is leading change. When we want to lead a change, we need to share the vision. A few years ago, I was fortunate to work with a sharp product owner named Nakia. We began working together on an application for customer service representatives. As we began working, our team struggled with understanding the vision. That's when Nakia realized we needed a field trip. Nakia had the entire team spend a day with those customer service representatives. We got to see their struggles. The team came back energized and with a better understanding. Nakia was able to lead a change by connecting and sharing the vision with the team. These 3 core soft skills can change your career direction. Let me share a story how I use them myself. In my first role as a manager, I tried to get to know the team. This can help build trust and influence with them. Perhaps you're thinking, this won't work for me. Let me tell you a story about AJ. AJ was a strong developer, but he rarely talked. He worked in a slow, methodical fashion and always kept his emotions in check. Over time, he came off as aloof and his teammates became irritated with his style. I tried to get to know him. For instance, AJ traveled to Germany to pick up his new BMW. He was quite excited about that. Still, his unwillingness to communicate with others, and especially the product owner, was wearing thin. That's when my manager came to me and said, Tom, it is time for AJ to decide if he wants to be part of the team. My manager asked me to put AJ on a PIP, or performance improvement plan. I had 60 days to help him improve, or else. Despite his strong coding skills, his career was on a downward trajectory. When I met with AJ and explained the situation, he began yelling at me and stormed out of the meeting. The first 2 weeks after this incident were really shaky. I kept checking in on AJ. He wouldn't talk to me or anyone. I knew he was an introvert. He needed his space and time. Eventually, AJ and I sat down and discussed the PIP and how it made him feel. That's when I got AJ to agree to try some experiments. We met as a team and created some working agreements. These clarified everyone's role. Also, it stated how we would work together. I got the product owner to give AJ one final shot. In the end, we were able to give AJ the space he needed. Through coaching him and his teammates, we worked through it. AJ was able to develop the soft skills he needed to change his career direction. I was able to communicate and influence the team using the 3 core soft skills. I learned how to help AJ, myself, and others. You can do this too. Coding is important, but it's not enough. We can keep our head down and bozo it through our career, but that won't get us where we want to go. Relationships matter. Empathy and understanding matter. Communication matters. Practicing these soft skills can give you more influence, which leads to more success. Better collaboration with your coworkers, people seeking out your opinion as an expert, managers choosing you for the most exciting projects. Practicing soft skills is how you code the future of your dreams. All right, that is the second part of Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions in the chat. Yes. Awesome. Thank you. So I have, as you guys heard, I'll just have a couple, we'll just do like maybe one question, Randy, and then I'll turn it over to you. I know we got our time box here, but you heard I had a little career misstep there. And I know that sometimes happens to people, not to say, you have to be let go, but we all have maybe those times where we maybe stick our foot in our mouth or say something to the wrong person. But what types of career missteps and maybe some lessons learned that you guys have? Anything to share there? Learning who you can trust. That's important, Cindy. I take it that must be something you learned from experience as well. Yes, yes. Yep.
Unfortunately, I feel this is true for a lot of organizations where it comes down a lot to managing perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you may be the hardest working person, you name it, at the end of the day, it's like what the others see, what you make visible, of the work you do. And if the right people don't see what you're doing and really understand and get to know the value, it's like, you won't get far.
Yeah, that's a good point, Monica. You bring up that, like when we do something, I think sometimes people forget that they need to inform, whatever the part of the work you've done, because I think sometimes people forget or don't understand or don't see it. So good point. Good point.
I still think it has a lot to do with the influence
Mm-hmm.
because everyone has their own agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's important. Relationships are really important. Learning to manage with different individuals and different groups. Yeah, that's important. Requires a lot of emotional intelligence. Yes, EQ. Yes, Mark, have a career plan B. That is good. Good advice.
So this is Clay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So this is my first IIBA meeting. I just joined the IIBA. I do not come from a software development background, but I've had such positive experiences working with very talented BAs in my career that I thought this would be an important step for me because, you know, a few you've touched on this in your comments, and Tom, you as well, that we need to learn to communicate our process and our methodology in order to achieve the organization's objectives. And I think sometimes what is my greatest challenge is getting the sponsors and stakeholders to pause and understand why the process should follow this methodology that we're describing, why, you know, the Scrum or Scrum Ban or whatever process we're trying to follow,
Yeah.
why we need them to adopt it and adhere to it, and being able to convince them of that value and of the benefit in advance so that they and the people that they own who are, you know, matrixed, lent to the project, embrace it so we can actually achieve our objectives. So so thank you, Tom, for your presentation and the feedback from the team.
That's a good point, Clay. I think what you brought up, Clay, is it's so important that, especially I think BAs, you know, that you have to educate people on that process. It's just kind of a bit of education because sometimes we assume maybe people know what, you know, what's your role, what skill sets you guys bring. I think that's part of the thing, that education, and maybe even, I know we had talked a little bit before about that IT department branding, but I think sometimes we need to brand ourselves in our career and kind of share what do we bring to the table? Because sometimes I think we underestimate what skills, especially like BAs, underestimate, because you guys have a lot of skills, you do a lot of different things, but I think part to your point, Clay, they just need to educate the process and let people know what you can help with.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Now with that, I guess I will turn it over to Randy, and I'm just going to pop in so feel free if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn there, or if you know another venue that I can bring this message to, feel free to reach out or contact me there. But with that, I appreciate everyone's time, and I want to turn it over to Randy.